It's anything that we go through in life, the number one battle we always face, no matter what it is a mental battle, you know? And when you sit there and say, I am a hope warrior, I mean, say that to yourself. I'm a hope warrior. Man, I just feel something rising up that I'm about to go through whatever that I'm going through at that moment in time. It may be a job. It may not even be something that's painful, okay? But the fact that I need to achieve something in life, I just don't hope that my business is going to be big. I hope warrior my business is going to be big, because now it puts me into action, because who doesn't want to be a warrior in life?
Welcome to the Hope Warrior Project podcast, where we bring you an extra dose of hope to help you get over the humps of life. I'm Stephanie Martino.
And I'm Lydia Zuniga. And together we are bringing you real stories of hope from real people. We believe by hearing other people's stories of challenge and transformation, we can all gain some hope for ourselves.
So if you've been looking to find and hold on to hope, you're in the right place. Join us on this journey as we all become warriors of hope.
Joseph James is with us today, and he is going to share about his journey of reframing his perception of pain. Growing up in an abusive family, his story has its share of pain, but his most challenging encounter was losing his wife to cancer. He assumed that if they did all the right things, she'd be healed, and that her story of recovery would be a source of hope to others. They documented her journey and had hope, but she still lost her life to cancer, and Joseph was left with their 3 children. His search for answers gave him a whole new perspective on life, and today he's sharing his story, not only on our podcast today, which we're so grateful, but he's starting his own podcast, which is super exciting. He inspires people to understand the purpose of their own pain and encourages them to move forward even when that purpose is not yet clear. So thank you so much for being with us today, Joseph.
Thank you all so much. I really appreciate this, and I'm truly honored to be on your podcast. Really excited.
Well, we are too. And, I know your story is one that many people will be able to relate to, just because cancer is so prevalent. And I'm sure there's no doubt that anyone listening, we've all known family or friends that have had cancer or maybe are currently, going through their cancer battle. And, it's always such a blessing when we hear those stories of someone that has beaten cancer and they're now living cancer-free and healthy. But we also know there's never a guarantee on that outcome. And it can be a long and painful journey for both the person with the cancer as well as those closest to them, which to me makes this probably the scariest illness out there. I'm not much of a worrier, but if I worry ever, it's about this, like the thought of, my family or friends getting cancer. So, and I'm assuming I'm not the only one. I think there's probably a lot of people that have that fear just because we know so much about it. So, kind of with that, I guess that backdrop, when your wife was diagnosed with cancer, what was that like for you, and what did you do?
Yeah, absolutely. Good question. So a little backstory before I actually got the news is my wife lost her mother to ovarian cancer at the age of 3 months. Okay. They literally discovered it when her mom gave birth to her. So for her whole life, she knew that her mom died of ovarian cancer. And of course she had ovarian cysts and things like that. So she always had that looming in the back of her mind. I get the phone call from the doctor breaking the news to me. And when they found it, they went in and removed over 80% of her liver and found the cancer in her colon. The doctor told me, he sat down with me and he's like, Joseph, he says, this next 72 hours, we don't know what the body's going to do. Her body is naturally under stress from cancer itself. Then it's put under even more stress because of the removal of the liver. So I knew it was a very critical, 72 hours. And so I told the doctor, I said, listen, I know my wife, I know how she's battled with this. We just had a baby. And now all of a sudden I'm faced with the news of she has cancer. So I knew that would hit her like a ton of bricks. And so for the next 72 hours was probably the hardest, because I had to not only keep it from her, But I had to break the news to her mom and dad, her brother and sister, and she was raised by her aunt and uncle. And so she just adopted them as mom and dad. Okay. And so, I had to break the news to them. I had to break the news to my family. I had to break the news to her friends, my friends that were close. And it was just nothing but an onslaught of just, I mean, pain and fear and not knowing the unknown, not knowing what was going to happen. And then on top of that, I had to make sure that, because she was at a school of medicine where they did the surgery at. And so you had all the resident teams coming in from 6 a.m. in the morning to 11 a.m. every single morning. And this is 5 and 6 and 7 different teams. Cardiology team, because she had heart issues, the surgery team, pregnancy team, the cancer team, anybody and everybody you can imagine with her, they were coming through, and I would literally have to step outside the room. I'm like, don't anybody say a word, and I'm having to protect that, because I knew that the moment, if she found out during this 72-hour window, the critical window of the doctor saying, we don't know if she's going to make it. We have no idea what her body's going to do. I knew that if I told her, I just knew her mentally, and her mental state of being would just shut down, and it would go from depression to death all within 72 hours. I just knew it in my heart. But I also felt, in a sense, I was hiding something from my wife, but I was hiding it to protect her, not because I was trying to lie to her. And she never really asked the question. And then we waited about 96 hours to break the news. So that was, in the middle of protecting her from that, it was just excruciating, because I'm living with this. I can't sleep. I'm getting barrage of messages and things like that from my family, from her family. How's everybody going? Things like that. And how do you answer somebody? Oh yeah, we're doing great. No, we're not. We're going through hell. It just started, and knowing that as a husband, as a father to my children, we can all sit there and say things like, oh, I'll run into the burning building, or I'll protect them, but it's just like, you're now faced with it in a total different reality. This wasn't a physical protection. This was mental. This was spiritual. Oh, and you brought up a great example, Stephanie, about, most people know somebody that's been through a long-term illness, and you think of it in terms of long-term, 3, 4, 5 years, right? And when we think of things like that, because I've had people that's gone through those things and gone through illnesses, and I knew that. And you think long-term, right? The battle is long-term, but you don't think about the moment by moment things that happen. And it really hit me hard. This was probably about 2 weeks. She had been home maybe about 2 weeks. And I remember we're in our back bedroom, and I remember her asking me to go get a glass of water. It probably took me no more than 45 seconds to get there and back, maybe a minute. And I remember my daughter, I'll never forget this. I remember my daughter running down the hallway and saying, Dad, Mom's crying. Now, when I left to go get water, she was in good spirits. Everything was perfectly fine. And within a minute later, she's bawling her eyes out. And this is the words that she spoke to me. I'll never forget this. She says, I have no hope, and I smell the smell of death. That's when I knew this was going to be a fight. That's when it really, really hit me that this wasn't just a long-term battle of cancer. This was going to be second by second. This was going to be minute by minute. This was going to be hour by hour, day by day, but how can you focus even on the fight during the day or of the day when you're dealing with it second by second?
Something that's really sticking out to me, and maybe it's also sticking out even more clearly because we just interviewed someone with her own cancer story, and she's a survivor. But something that we really focused on, or that she really focused on in her interview, and what we talked about was like her mindset while she was going through it. So I think it's really interesting to talk to you as the spouse, right? Because the cancer wasn't in your body. Talk a little bit more about that and kind of like the effect that had on things.
Absolutely. So, mindset is a powerful thing, like you said. And, I knew this was going to be her journey. And the only way, uh, by nature, I'm a fixer. Okay. I've wanted to fix things. Being in an abusive family, I wanted to always fix the situation, but I had no control. And so all I could do was rely on God. And I'm sitting there and I'm praying. I just felt the Holy Spirit speak to me and says, document this journey. And the only way I knew is like, okay, I do videos for dog training and I used to travel and preach and things like that. So my biggest platform right now is social media. I went to Facebook and I started to share what had happened, and I was broken. That was my way of not only venting, but kind of letting my emotions out and crying and praying for people. But I began to begin with it, kind of start off as like, hey, everybody, this is what's going on. And, I'm losing my wife to cancer and things like that. But it really began to shift. The Holy Spirit just began to shift things where now, not only was I sharing, but it was now becoming ministry. I was now ministering to people that were hurt, that were broken, that were going through pain, that were going through their own lives hell in the midst of sharing mine. I begin to have people reach out to me privately on Messenger, Facebook Messenger, or even people that knew me and text me and says, Joseph, listen, I'm hearing and I'm following your story. And, I hate that you're going through these things, but your faith is encouraging me so much. And I'm not a person of faith, you know, or I would have, people message me and saying, listen, my marriage has been on the rocks for years, and I see how you're handling your marriage. I see your love for your wife. I see your faith that you're standing on. And I've been getting my husband to watch your videos when you go live, and it's healing our marriage. And I even had testimonials of people saying, my son was addicted to drugs and is now off of drugs just by you sharing your faith. And I was never sharing anything about drugs. I was just like, God, this is who I am. This is what's going on in my life. And you're an all sovereign God, and I'm believing for healing, but yet I'm walking through hell at the same time. You look at social media, you don't have to spend 20 seconds on social media on a news channel to find negativity. You don't even have to look for it. It's there. Because of me being able to share the story, it started to encourage me. That's where I was getting my strength from. My strength was coming from God, but because I was sharing my faith, it's like as I was pouring out, God was pouring in. The more I began to share things, the more I began, it turned into, instead of videos about the death of my wife, it now became a story of the life of my wife. And I think that's a big difference between sharing about how somebody's dying versus how somebody's living. How our journey and how our family's living, and every single day the kids are getting, stronger for their mom, and they're helping take care of the baby. And, and I'm learning to do things. Listen, I was learning how to be a father all over again. That's where, like what you were saying, Lydia, about the mindset is, because of the mindset that I had, it now began to pour out into my kids. It pour out into my wife. And, I've always learned this about prayer. Prayer can't be taught. It has to be caught. You catch it by being around other people that are praying. When I begin to share worship music and play worship music, my kids are going through the house singing. My kids are going through the house praying. My kids are going through the house, that when they would see mom start to cry, no, mom, no, let's go, let's get up, and they begin to emulate everything that I was doing. And though that may not have been the right way, that's what was working for our family. It created that mental toughness. It created that fight to heal. And the journey went on, and it got to a point that I just began to, it literally, the sharing of everything turned into more of praying for people. I'm praying for my wife, and then I'm praying for people. If I was on Facebook Live and the names would pop up of somebody viewing, I would immediately start praying for them. Like, this isn't about me. It's about God doing something in everybody. And then it turned into 40 days of prayer. I called people to 40 days of prayer. I even fasted through those times. And I declare, listen, everybody, I am telling you, at the end of 40 days, you're going to see my wife healed. I never one time thought my wife was going to die. Never one time. In the 11 months of the fight, of the battle, the journey. I never one time thought she was going to pass away. I had it in my heart that I'm like, okay, God, the reason why this is happening, the reason why you spoke this to me to document this journey is so that people would know what's going on. Everybody know that it's a true, legit story, and that you would get the glory from her healing. That's how I was viewing it. And so that kept me going. It kept me not only sharing my faith, but also just me working harder at ministering to other people. And when 40 days hit, it didn't happen. So there were things that were happening, miracles that were taking place. I was becoming stronger. Our marriage was becoming stronger. Our kids were developing a relationship with God, and then other people just being touched and their lives being saved and things like that. And so we just continued on until now we're realizing that chemo's not working. And it led us all the way up to the day that things changed, and ultimately that was her death. But there was just so much that happened prior to it. And it was the mentality, it was the faith that kept me going.
First of all, I want to say just how amazing it is for you to be vulnerable enough to share the journey that you are going to in real time. People don't want to share stories until they're at the end of the story and it's a happy ending. You know what I mean? And like you said, so many good things came out of you sharing in the moment. Like, people being touched by it when they're struggling with addiction, when literally you didn't talk about addiction. Like, that's what Stephanie and I have been noticing too, is that you can listen to a story of somebody's journey, and even though nothing is the same, none of the circumstances are the same, you connect to that fighting spirit, you connect to that hopeful mindset, you connect to that person's heart, and you can be encouraged in whatever you're going through. So what changed? Talk a little bit about what happened once you figured out that she's not going to get through this.
There was a message that a friend sent to me. It was a pastor preaching, and they had sent it to me back in June. Now, this is June of 18. She passed away in January of 19. They shared this video with me on Facebook, and I'm like, oh my God, he's talking about going through pain and all this different stuff. I'm like, and I sent it to my wife on Facebook Messenger, and I think I realized that she never actually even watched it. Okay. And that's kind of how my wife was sometimes. And so, but I'm like, babe, this is why you're going through this, is to be able to touch other people. You're going through this, And Saturday night, January the 26th, I'm going through her Facebook and I'm responding to messages of people sending their condolences and things like that. And I run across this video. And basically he went on to say that the reason why we go through things, but it's being able to feel what people are going through. But how can you truly feel what somebody's going through unless you've been through it yourself? And when he talked about that, it hit me. Man, it hit me hard, And I'm like, it dawned on me right then and there that this journey was never about my wife going through cancer. It was about me going through this journey with my wife and her battle of cancer. Because see, my wife wasn't one that was outspoken about anything. On all the Facebook videos that I did, not one time did she ever talk on any of them. That wasn't her. She didn't like it. She felt uncomfortable. But I was the voice. I was the one that was going to capture people. I was going to be the one that God was going to use as the voice, not her. But she had to go through the pain, because I was going to be able to talk about the pain, my side of the story. I've never been through a divorce, so I can't sit there and say, I know how you feel. I've never lost a child, so I can't sit there and say, I know how you feel. But I know what it's like to lose a wife. I know what it's like to lose my mom when I wished it was my dad. But then to know, because I hated my dad, both my sisters and my brother, we hated our dad. But God brought my dad to his knees when my mom passed away in 2005. And we did not have a good relationship. Even though we lived in the home, he was very abusive, mentally, physically, spiritually he was, emotionally he was. But over the next 14 years, my dad died my best friend. So I know what all that's like. And what a lot of people don't know about my story is he passed away 22 days before my wife did. So I'm getting hit with all of this all at the same time. And I'm like, oh my God, when I heard the message from the pastor, I'm like, this is for me. That was my why. And that's when everything just changed to me. I'm like, okay, God, this is why you had us go through this. It was for me. It was not for her. It was for me. And that's what just changed. And I had complete peace. And it was later on that night that she passed away, early into Sunday morning that she passed away. But I had total and complete peace. I've never asked God why. I was never mad at God, never questioned God, because I knew that we can't touch what we cannot feel.
Wow. I mean, I'm just sitting here, just soaking in so much of what you're saying. And it's an interesting hope story, because, obviously you said you never thought your wife was going to pass away. You had the faith and the belief that she was going to be healed. But then the journey that God took you throughout this, showing you something different. He did something different than what you wanted or maybe you expected or hoped for. And how it's made such a huge difference in your life and other people's lives. I mean, just the examples that you shared of people reaching out to you and how you being willing to share what's going on, touch their hearts. And I love what you said about the more you poured out, the more God poured in. And I think that it's something really deep, that if we think about it more broadly, when we're so full of our own self and our own worries and, just ruminating in our own minds about things that are going on in our own lives, there's no space for God, right? We're not allowing him space. And so this was a way that you were pouring out of yourself, and then he was able to pour in and give you that peace and give you that strength. And so obviously, you and your children, I miss your wife dearly, but there's something God can give to help with that comfort and that peace and walk with you through that grief. That is just something that we can't get from any other human being. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that, because I know that this idea of kind of unanswered prayers can be really hard in any situation in life, right? Because I'm a Christian, we hear, ask and it shall be given. Well, we can say that just really easily, but there's more to that, right? We take one little verse from the Bible and we think, well, that's it. There's more to it. And I think knowing and being willing that God's plans are bigger than ours is so important. And your story has been a hopeful, encouraging story from that perspective. I guess, what you've been through, what else are you doing, today? How is life today now that you have gone through this experience and have been sharing your story? I think we mentioned earlier in the intro that you are starting your own podcast, but what is that experience? How is that helping in your life today?
I started to find myself that everything that I had been through in my life has always served a greater purpose than myself. And so when I didn't get the answered questions, God, why didn't you save my wife? Things like that, is I knew there was something bigger, and so knowing that right there was a trigger on how I can help myself, because not, my father, when he was abusive and couldn't tell me why, give a good reason, my wife not being healed of cancer, things like that, watching my brother go through a devastating divorce, my sister losing her son. And so I started to think about all those things. And like you said, it's like, we have not because we ask not. Okay, God, I'm asking, right? I'm asking time and time and time again. But, I just kept on. When I wasn't getting the answers, one, it was allowing me to come to the realization that God, it's not that you're choosing not to answer me. It's you're trying to show me in different ways that his ways are not our ways. His thoughts are not our thoughts, and I'm like, okay, God, you're all supreme being. And though there are times that I don't want to believe in you because things aren't happening, it's like I don't have a choice. And Lydia, I think you had said it earlier about, when people are, I put myself out there saying that she's going to be healed in 40 days and then giving people that are non-believers words, to kind of come against you. I'm like, it wasn't up to me. I couldn't heal her anyways. When I was kind of going through the healing process, is I was understanding that I had to do something with my life. It just wasn't about 3 kids. It was also for me too. And I had to understand that. And where a lot of people go wrong, where I started to feel like I started kind of figuring this out is we create goals. Oh, I got to get back up to work, or, oh, I got to, I got to do this, or, oh, I got to finish this project, or I got to, no, that's too much. It's kind of like thinking of the 3, 5, and 10-year goal when you can't even think what's in front of you tomorrow. And so I started creating goals that just simply, I'm just going to sit up in bed. See, a lot of us get depressed because we're not doing something, and because we're trying to make it too hard on what we do. So one of the first things I started doing was making small action steps to reach my goal. Yes, my goal was to eventually get back into work. Okay. But I didn't want to get out of bed. Screw going to work. Who cares? And I'm like, I own my own business. I don't need it. I'll take family vacation. Everybody will understand. And so I had to start making small action steps. That was number one. So it was first thing is just sit up in bed, even if for like 5 minutes. And then you lay back down for another 2 or 3 hours. Okay. Sit back up in bed. Okay. Then it came to, let me get off the couch or off the bed, and I'll just move to the couch. Then it was off the bed and onto the couch, make a cup of coffee or whatever the case is. And I just started making small action steps to now this became my new daily routine. So that was number one for me. Number two is I created the goals. Okay. And then, so number two was, taking time to grieve. Okay. Where I felt like I was messing up is I was spending all day in a spirit of grief, and it wasn't allowing me to think of other things. I couldn't process things. I couldn't think of things. I couldn't even think about getting out of bed because I was spending my whole day grieving instead of trying to break it up. And so what I started to do, I started breaking up my grief in 15-minute periods. I'd grieve for 15 minutes. I'm like, okay, you're done. I might have only been done for 2 minutes, and then I start back all over. But that 2 minutes eventually became 5 minutes, became 30 minutes, became half the day, to now I'm skipping a day. Okay. But with the action steps and the goals created, and then creating a time to grieve, I started to create a routine. And so I would begin to find people on social media that would comment on my page, be like, oh, I'm struggling with this, or I'm hurting with this. And I would reach out to them. So number one is I would find people to reach out to. And then that was number three. Number four is I would help them. And I would put my emotions and my feelings on the back burner, and I started helping them. And those 4 things right there just revolutionized my last year, in 2019. And then, of course, I just began to seek out motivational speakers, Tony Robbins, Grant Cardone, Jim Rohn, those people like that, to start feeding my soul. I was listening to worship music more. I was playing the gospel, the Bible on my phone. I just had to do something to get my mind out of what I was doing, and that's really how I started changing things. That's how I started using my pain as a launch pad. Instead of the glue that was holding me back, I use it to launch me into my destiny.
So through this journey, you've grown, you've shared, you've learned. Thank you so much for sharing that with us and with our audience. I think this is one that I definitely will be going back and listening to a few times, because I think there's so many things in here that could be applied just to daily life. Even like you said, like the small goals of, okay, it's not about the big goal right now. It's about sitting up in bed. And, our best performance today, what that looks like may not look like our best performance tomorrow, because we're not always in the same situation. We may be suffering with something. And so when we compare ourselves to, well, I did this amazing thing, or I accomplished all these goals when I was feeling great, I should be able to do it when I'm grieving. Well, no. Right. And so the small goals, be realistic, adjust as makes sense to your situation. So anyway, you've said it all. I won't re-say everything, but these are just some things that really stood out to me. So one thing we'd like to ask all of our guests towards the end of our interviews is what the term hope warrior means to them. So without, really connecting it necessarily to what we do, when you hear that term hope warrior, what does that mean to Joseph?
Hope is just kind of that belief that we think that we're reaching for the stars so much. We're just hoping that it's going to happen. And sometimes there's no action behind it, right? We're just like, oh, I hope I have a great day, versus like faith, we start to put things in action, right? But when you tie the word warrior onto the end of it, to me, it's like, I'm going into battle. And so now I'm not just hoping, the mental thought of, I hope that something happens, or maybe it'll just go my way kind of thing, or I hope you get healed. Now it's just like, I am fighting for it to happen. So it to me, tying those two words in together makes me it makes me an actionable person of hope itself. It's anything that we go through in life, the number one battle we always face, no matter what it is a mental battle. And when you sit there and say, I am a hope warrior, I mean, say that to yourself. I'm a hope warrior. Man, I just feel something rising up that I'm about to go through whatever that I'm going through at that moment in time. It may be a job. It may not even be something that's painful. Okay. But the fact that I need to achieve something in life, I just don't hope that my business is going to be big. I hope warrior, my business is going to be big, because now it puts me into action. Because who doesn't want to be a warrior in life? Who doesn't want to stand there? When I think of warrior, I think of the old soldiers like in 300, where they got all the gear on, the face mat, the metal, and they're carrying around all this different stuff. That's what I think of, And so when I hear the word hope warrior, I'm like, no matter what I'm going through in life, no matter what I'm about to face, it's not just a thought of hope. It's an action of being a warrior through my hope.
I love how fired up you got talking about that, because that fires me up, because, this has been a term that's been was placed on my heart quite a while ago, and it still affects me as much today as it did the first time it made its way into my life. And I love that you used the word battle, because actually at our church for Easter Sunday, like that was the theme of the sermon or the lesson or whatever you want to call it. And I found it interesting because, Easter is such a celebration, right? It's like the happy ending. But he was talking about the battle of, getting from Good Friday to Easter Sunday, and how we are Easter people living in a Good Friday world. And I just feel like that is the same thing as a hope warrior. Like, we are people that know that Easter's coming, but we also know that for Easter to come, the cross had to happen first. So I love that. And I love how passionate you got talking about that. It just makes me so happy.
Resurrection on Sunday without the death of Friday.
Exactly. Like Stephanie was saying, I think so many people will relate to your story because this is prevalent, and it is really hard, because I think when you think about being a warrior, it's like you feel powerful that you can do something about your life, and that you have some sort of control, some sort of influence, and that, by listening to the right speakers or hanging out with the right people, or, doing certain things, like you can have a positive influence on your life. But it makes it really difficult when we're trying to influence somebody else, or when what somebody else is going through is really influencing us, right? Which is really what happened in your story, is that, you were obviously very influenced by what your wife was going through, but you realized that, no, this is for me. Like this, like there's my side of the story, that my pain is going to be used for a bigger purpose. I'm sure people will be interested in your podcast and whatever else you have coming up. So if somebody does want to connect with you further, how could they do that?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking. So I am on Instagram, I'm on Twitter. A lot of those things aren't as active as they need to be, but Meet Joseph James. That's my Instagram handle, Meet Joseph James, all is one word. They can also go to Facebook, Joseph James. You can also, even if you really want to desperately find me, as I'm still putting a lot of things up, my business name is Professional Canine Solutions. They can actually even reach out to me that way as well. But Meet Joseph James. The Purpose Through Pain is the name of the podcast. That's going to be launched on April the 12th. And so they can also reach out through that way as well, or listen to the podcast, share it. But Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Meet Joseph James is going to be the best way.
Well, thank you again, Joseph. I'm looking forward to your podcast as well. I know we'll have some common endeavors with what you're doing. So we'd love to hear that. Really appreciate you sharing your time with us today and your story. And so glad that we have now the benefits of hearing what you went through and some things that we can take away for our own life.
Steph, Lydia, thank you all so much for having me. I'm so encouraged by this, and I love what you guys are doing with Hope Warrior. And hopefully y'all have a new little umph to your slogan there. And but thank you. I truly feel honored that y'all would allow me to share my story.
Hey, Lydia, remember when we wanted to start this podcast, but we had no idea where to start?
Yes. And when someone told us about Anchor, we were so surprised at how easy it was to use.
I know. Well, since we get questions about this quite often, we should probably let our audience know why we love it in case maybe they're wanting to start their own podcast.
Okay, well, first of all, it's everything we need to make a podcast in one place for free.
And I love that. I also love that there are creation tools that allow us to record and edit the podcast right from a phone or computer, and they're super easy to use.
Plus, Anchor distributes the podcast so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. And we can even make money with our podcast regardless of how many listeners.
So, guys, if you're thinking of starting a podcast, download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. To all you Hope Warriors out there, thank you for joining us today to hear another incredible story.
We hope that you are encouraged and are taking away something positive for your own life. If you want to hear more stories like the one today, be sure to subscribe to this podcast.
And don't forget to tell your friends about it because we can all use some extra hope in our lives.